His mother walked into a country club with pride. Minutes later, she was humiliated in front of billionaires. The valet had hardly opened the door of the black Lincoln Navigator when Elena Vance emerged, holding her purse firmly in both hands. While she wasn't adorned in designer logos, her entire presence spoke of refined quality, evident in the crisp lines of her attire and the dignity of her posture. She wore a wide-brimmed white hat with a ribbon that perfectly complemented her shoes, a classic style her late husband had always adored. The Crestwood Hills Country Club was serene under a flawless blue sky. Nathan had promised her the lunch would be a low-key event. "Just come, Mom," he'd said. No big speeches, just a simple toast after the signing. She was incredibly proud of him and the logistics empire he had forged, expanding from a modest warehouse in Charleston to a sprawling nationwide supply chain network. Today, that empire was on the brink of merging with a much larger entity, the Sterling Corporation, a name synonymous with old money and deep-rooted influence. But Elena wasn't concerned with such details. She was there to support her son, simply because he had asked. She had barely ascended the marble staircase when a woman in a navy blue uniform stepped directly into her path. "Pardon me," the woman stated flatly, her expression devoid of a smile. "All staff and deliveries must use the rear entrance." Elena tilted her head in confusion. "I am here for a luncheon with my son, Nathan Vance." The staffer didn't even blink. "Yes, well, it is policy that all catering and affiliated staff use the access point on the left." Elena paused, the familiar sting of being wrongly judged piercing her composure. "I am not a member of the staff, I am a guest." Across the patio, Nathan Vance was in the middle of raising a glass. His eyes scanned the lawn, finding his mother just as he registered the confrontational posture of the uniformed woman. A knot tightened in his chest. Elena took a calming breath. "You can check the guest list. My name is Elena Vance, and my son is one of the principals meeting here today." Before the employee could formulate a response, a sharp voice cut through the air like shattering glass. It seems the standards for entry have certainly fallen," remarked Beatrice Sterling, her expensive pearls a stark contrast to her sharp tone. "Are we now inviting the cleaning service to dine alongside us?" Several people turned their heads, and one man nearby chuckled dismissively. Nathan's jaw tensed. He was still holding the champagne flute mid-toast, but his smile had vanished completely. He deliberately set the glass down, a change in expression that did not go unnoticed by his colleagues. Carter, the youngest of the Sterling sons, gave a nervous laugh and suggested she was probably just joking. But Nathan paid him no mind. He was already moving. Elena looked up, her face a mask of calm, but her hands gripped her bag more tightly. Beatrice was already turning away, giving no further thought to her cruel remark. For her, it was just another insignificant moment. Nathan walked directly to his mother, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and looked into her eyes. "Are you all right?" she nodded, despite feeling the opposite. "I don't want to make a fuss, darling." "I know you don't," he said softly, "but I will." He then turned to the staffer. "This is my mother. You have just disrespected the most important individual in this entire establishment." The woman's mouth opened, but no words came out as a flush of embarrassment colored her cheeks. Nathan didn't raise his voice. There was no need. He escorted Elena back to the SUV, opened the door for her himself, and helped her settle inside. She reached for his arm just before he closed the door. "Don't let me ruin this momentous day for you." He met her gaze with a look of profound love. "You are the moment." He then shut the door and ascended the marble steps once more, his calm demeanor a veil for the intense fire raging within. What he did just a few hours later would send shockwaves through boardrooms, dominate headlines, and rattle powerful families from coast to coast. Back in the dining hall, Nathan's seat remained empty. An ornate fountain pen, intended for signing the final agreement, rested beside a thick stack of documents representing more than 18 months of grueling negotiations, revisions, and strategic planning, all culminating on this day. A champagne tower gleamed by the windows, everything perfectly in place except for Nathan. The atmosphere in the room shifted the instant he returned. It was not a dramatic change. There was no yelling, no angry declarations. Just a heavy, tense quiet, the kind that hangs in the air after a storm cloud passes. "Is everything all right?" asked Garrett Hayes, the Sterling family's general counsel. His voice was laced with a forced calm, the way a person speaks when they sense a $50 million problem but can't yet pinpoint its source. Nathan didn't answer immediately. He scanned the room, his eyes moving over the board members, the lawyers, and the assembled family. His gaze finally landed on Beatrice Sterling. She was still leisurely sipping her wine, half turned in her chair with her legs crossed, projecting an air of someone who hadn't even noticed the disruption. She wasn't just comfortable. She was certain that the deal was already a sure thing, that any potential issue had been smoothed over by money. He walked to his chair, placed both hands on its back, but did not sit down. "I have something to say," he announced. A few people looked up. The room didn't just get quiet, it froze in anticipation. "All of you know how much this deal was supposed to mean, not just for our companies, but for the markets and the next generation of this country's tech infrastructure. This merger was intended to change everything." He paused, looking at each face in the room one by one. "But I will not be signing it." A few moments of stunned silence followed before a ripple of low murmurs and confusion spread through the room. Someone was heard asking, "Wait, what?" Beatrice's head turned now, not quickly, but with a sharpness that conveyed his words had struck their target. "Pardon me," she asked, her tone bordering on a laugh. Nathan nodded. "You are pardoned," Garrett tried to intervene. "Is this a negotiation tactic?" "Nathan, if there's a last-minute concern, we can return to the table." Nathan finally sat, not in the chair reserved for the signing, but in one at the far end of the table, furthest from the contract. "No," he stated, "there is no more table." Beatrice scoffed, then leaned forward with a smile that failed to reach her eyes. "Let's not overreact because of a simple misunderstanding. I simply did not recognize the woman, that's all." He blinked once slowly. "That woman is my mother. I am aware of that now," she replied, struggling to keep her voice cool. "But surely—" Nathan cut her off, his voice low and almost gentle. "You knew what you were doing, and you said what you meant." Garrett cleared his throat. "We have invested tens of millions in preparation on both sides. There are significant legal implications here." Nathan leaned back, looking completely unbothered. "Then I'll see you in court. You can explain to a judge how disrespecting my family was a part of your corporate strategy." "Don't be so emotional," Beatrice muttered. That was the final straw. He leaned forward again, folding his hands on the table. "You think I built this company from a comfortable office? I unloaded freight, Beatrice. I drove delivery routes at 4 in the morning. I handled payroll from a small desk in my kitchen because we couldn't afford an accountant. I watched my mother take a bus to clean houses so that I could keep the lights on in our apartment. So when she arrives here dressed in her finest, filled with pride, and you humiliate her, you humiliate me." No one said a word. Then Nathan stood one last time. "There are deals you lose sleep over not signing. This isn't one of them." He walked out. No folder, no documents, no handshake, just silence. But by the next morning, silence was no longer an option for anyone involved. The media had already latched onto the story, and they were hungry for details. The first outlet to report on it was a small business podcast out of Boston, after a guest who attended the luncheon leaked just enough information. The headline, "Black CEO Kills $750 million Deal." After mother, insulted by white billionaire family, had enough fuel to start a raging fire. By noon, outlets like TechSphere and Forbes had picked it up, and by 6 p.m., cable news anchors were already hosting heated debates about it. The story was everywhere, not because a deal had collapsed, but because of why it had. A news camera captured Nathan Vance walking into his downtown Charlotte office the following morning. He wasn't wearing sunglasses and had no entourage. It was just him, holding a coffee and offering his usual nod to the front desk receptionist. A reporter shouted, "Was the Sterling family's comment the reason for the cancellation?" Another yelled, "Do you regret walking away from $750 million? He didn't provide an answer, not yet. Inside the building, his team was already handling a non-stop flood of calls. While some investors were confused and others were furious, a surprising number were incredibly proud. Their inboxes were inundated with messages from executives at other firms, warehouse workers, teachers, and retired veterans, all conveying the same essential message. Thank you for not letting that disrespect go unchallenged. That afternoon, Nathan scheduled a press conference. There were no prepared media kits or elaborate backdrops, just a single podium, a folding table, and 30 reporters packed into a conference room built to hold 15. He stepped up to the microphone, looking tired but steady. "I didn't cancel the deal over money," he began. "I canceled it because the moment you allow disrespect into the room, it spreads like a disease. I wasn't raised to accept that, and I will not build my company's future on a foundation of silence." A journalist from CNBC asked if it was true that Beatrice Sterling had made the comment directly herself. Nathan didn't flinch. "Yes, loud enough for people nearby to hear it, and loud enough for my mother to feel it." Another reporter chimed in. "Some might say that's not a valid reason to walk away from a deal that could define a company's future." He nodded slowly. "It depends on what kind of company you are trying to define." The room fell silent again. His statement was brief. It didn't need to be long. Respect is not a negotiable clause in a contract, and if we start trading our dignity for a profit, then we have already lost. He stepped down and walked out, just as he had the day before. But outside that conference room, the world had changed. In places where people normally whispered, they were suddenly speaking out loud. That same night, clips of his speech went viral on TikTok, X, and YouTube. A former employee of the Sterling family posted a story about being instructed to use a service elevator during a prestigious charity gala. A Latinx caterer shared an experience of being asked to remove her work apron before entering a main lobby to set up for an event. The social media thread garnered tens of thousands of shares in just a few hours. Nathan had not planned any of this. He wasn't attempting to start a movement, but sometimes all it takes is one person standing still for others to find their footing. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the Sterling Corporation was scrambling in an emergency board meeting. Harrison Sterling, Beatrice's eldest son, who had been mostly uninvolved in the negotiations, asked the question none of them wanted to address. "Do we need to issue an apology?" Beatrice frowned. "I don't apologize to people who are overly sensitive." An angry board member snapped back. "You insulted the man's mother, Beatrice, in public during the deal signing. What did you honestly think would happen?" "We've made comments worse than that to each other in this very room," she argued, "and none of us ever lost a multi-hundred-million-dollar acquisition because of it," Harrison muttered under his breath. The numbers, however, were beginning to shift against them. Stockholders started demanding answers. Brand analysts issued stark warnings about the escalating costs to their reputation. Even their own PR firm was hesitant when asked to try and spin the narrative. That weekend, the Sterling name took a significant hit as people began to recall every story they had ever heard, re-examining every past encounter that had felt slightly off. What was once viewed as the respectable class of old money was now being seen through a new, unflattering lens, entitlement with a smile. But while the Sterlings scrambled to contain the growing fallout, Nathan was about to face an entirely different kind of pressure, this time from within his own inner circle. Inside the Charlotte headquarters, the atmosphere was hardly peaceful. Nathan's decision had transformed him into a public symbol, but symbols inevitably attract weight, pressure, and intense scrutiny. Some of this pressure was applied quietly behind closed doors. Some was not. He met with his executive team in the upstairs conference room, a wide glass space with a view overlooking Trade Street. Most of them had been with him from the very beginning, some even since the warehouse days. But loyalty has many layers, and not everyone was on the same page. Marcus Thorne, his CFO, was the first to speak. "We need to discuss what this means for the long term, not just this week, but 12 months from now. Our entire international infrastructure was tied to this merger, Nathan." "I know," Nathan replied calmly. "We are looking at serious legal backlash." The Sterling Corporation is already drafting breach of contract claims. Their lawyers are going to argue you killed the deal for personal reasons. It wasn't personal, Nathan said. It was a matter of principle. But can we afford to stand on principle right now? Asked David Chen, his COO. We are still a late-stage startup. Do you think the board isn't going to panic? Nathan looked at David, his eyes steady. Let them. That response quieted the room for a moment. Then Maria Flores, his head of marketing, leaned forward. Nathan, I support your decision. I truly do. But you have to understand, you've become a headline, a symbol. People are calling you the man who walked away from generational wealth to protect his mother. That comes with an immense amount of heat. You are now the guy who said no to a massive fortune because someone insulted his mom in public. I said no to being owned, he corrected. I get that, Maria replied. But if you don't take control of this narrative, someone else will, and they'll do it quickly. Marcus added, we're already seeing it. Some investors are nervous. I've had several calls this morning. They want assurances. They want a plan. Nathan stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city looked ordinary. Traffic moved, and a mother walked her child across the street, holding his hand tightly. He thought of Elena, how small she had looked on those marble steps in Charleston, and yet how tall she had stood. Anyway, I am not going to teach people that power means swallowing your pride, Nathan said finally. Not here, not in my company, and not for any size of check. David leaned back, frustrated. Okay, but what if we collapse because of this? Then we rebuild, Nathan said, but at least we won't rot from the inside. There was a profound silence after that, and then something unexpected happened. Maria nodded, then Marcus, and finally David gave a reluctant shrug. We'll hold, Marcus said, for now. They didn't all agree, not completely, but something in the room had shifted. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was fear, maybe it was both. But outside those walls, not everyone was as prepared to stand beside him, especially those who had been betting on the payout. A few days later, Nathan's phone buzzed with a message from Leo Vance, his cousin and co-founder. It was a single line, we need to talk, face to face. They met at a diner in Raleigh, in the very same booth where they had once sketched their first business plan on napkins. Leo was already there, nursing a coffee when Nathan slid in across from him. I heard from Sterling Trust Bank this morning, Leo said, not wasting any time. They're pausing our credit line, the one we were going to use to scale our West Coast operations. Nathan nodded. I figured they might. Leo stared at him in disbelief. You figured? Nathan, we were right there. This wasn't some random buyout. This was our generational leap, our kids' future. And I wasn't going to let that future be built on my mother's humiliation, Nathan replied. Leo shook his head, his eyes hard. Did you ever think that maybe that was her fight to pick, not yours? Nathan leaned in. She wasn't fighting Leo. She was being stepped on. This isn't the same as our old struggles back in Durham. You made a decision for all of us without asking, and now people are saying you did it for clout. I did it because I was raised not to sell my name for a seat at someone else's table, Nathan retorted. Leo sat back, his lips tight. You're lucky people see you as a hero right now. You'd better hope that lasts. Nathan stood, tossing a $50 bill on the table. If it doesn't, I'll still sleep fine. But deep down, even Nathan knew the real storm hadn't hit yet, not until the Sterlings made their next move. The Sterling estate in Charleston was built like a fortress, with stone walls, antique iron gates, and hedges trimmed with military precision. Inside the main study, the family gathered around a long mahogany table, the air stiff with tension. No one dared sip the wine that had been poured. Beatrice Sterling sat at the head, her fingers clasped under her chin, her expression unreadable. Harrison, her eldest, was pacing, while Carter scrolled nervously through his phone. The only one who spoke with any ease was Claire Evans, their crisis PR manager. We need to issue a statement, she said. Something short, acknowledging the incident, expressing regret, and emphasizing your shared values. Beatrice scoffed. What values? That woman looked like she didn't belong. That's not my fault. Claire blinked once slowly. You just said that out loud in front of your children while I am here trying to protect your legacy. Harrison stopped pacing. Mom, Nathan's walking away has already tanked interest in our tech sector portfolio. Do you understand how bad this is? He'll come back, she said confidently. They always do. Pride fades when the money runs dry. Clea shut her binder with a sharp snap. You don't get it. This isn't about the deal anymore. This is cultural. He struck a chord. Carter looked up from his phone. People are calling him a hero, Mom. They're reposting his speech, quoting him like he's some civil rights icon. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively. They'll forget by next week. Harrison looked at her like she was an old painting cracking at the edges. They won't. You've become the symbol of elitist racism in every podcast and headline right now, and you haven't even said you're sorry. I'm not apologizing for having standards. Then we're done, Harrison said flatly. You've already cost us one deal. I'm not letting you cost us the entire family business. She turned slowly to look at him. You're going to side with them? No, he said, his voice firm. I'm siding with reality. The room was silent again. Beatrice's empire, constructed upon a foundation of carefully curated appearances and rigid control, was beginning to wobble because all the corporate press releases in the world could not erase the memory of that single moment on the terrace. The condescending sound of her voice, her dismissive tone, and the look of quiet pain on Elena Vance's face. Eventually, the Sterling Group released an official statement. It was bland, cold, and filled with legal jargon and a generic sense of regret. The Sterling Group regrets the recent miscommunication that led to the premature conclusion of the merger. We continue to uphold our values of inclusion and mutual respect. Nathan didn't respond publicly, but his silence on the matter spoke more loudly than any post ever could. Instead, he simply continued to build his company. By now, journalists had delved into his background, uncovering photos of a young Nathan delivering packages in Charlotte and finding a quote from a former teacher who recalled him staying after class to study business books. A clip from an old podcast resurfaced in which he said, "I'm not trying to get into anyone's club. I'm trying to build my own house." Meanwhile, Elena had become a respected public figure in her own right. She made a brief appearance on Good Day America, sitting in a simple chair with her hands folded in her lap. "I didn't ask for any of this attention," she said, "but I raised my son to speak up when silence costs too much." The host asked if she would have preferred he sign the deal anyway. She smiled, a soft but firm expression on her face. "Some money comes with chains attached. I'm too old to be wearing chains." That clip went viral. Influencers stitched it into their own videos, and young entrepreneurs quoted her during panel discussions. Quietly, companies began to pull out of partnerships with Sterling-affiliated businesses, not because of Nathan, but because of what Beatrice had come to represent. In an era where reputation travels faster than fact, perception becomes reality, and reality was undeniably shifting. Still, Nathan didn't gloat. He went to work, met with his partners, hired more staff, and visited his mother every Sunday, bringing her gardenias and banana pudding from the same bakery she had always loved in Durham. But just when things seemed to be settling down, an unexpected phone call would pull Nathan right back into the spotlight. This time, not for what he had walked away from, but for what someone else had uncovered. The call came just after 9 p.m. Eastern on a Wednesday. Nathan was alone in his office, working through financial projections. The building was mostly dark, with cleaning crews moving quietly through the lower floors. He almost didn't answer when he saw the blocked number, but something compelled him to pick up. "Mr. Vance." The voice was sharp and a little raspy, as if it belonged to someone who had smoked for decades but had only recently quit. "I'm not calling to make trouble. I'm calling because you need to know what they're trying to do." Nathan sat up straighter. "Who is this?" "I worked with the Sterlings for 17 years. I was on their legal acquisition team." "You're not the first name they've tried to erase when it didn't suit them." "Erase?" he questioned. "They're preparing a countersuit," the voice continued. "They're digging into your early filings, your first funding rounds, trying to frame you as unstable. They want to make you look volatile and unpredictable, say you brought politics into business and ruined shareholder value. They're hoping people will forget why you walked away in the first place." Nathan leaned back, staring out the tall window. And why are you telling me this? Because I've seen this before. They destroy, then they deny. You made the mistake of embarrassing them in public. They'll try to bury you quietly. The line clicked dead. Nathan sat there, unmoving. He knew the Sterlings played hardball, but this was different. It was war, and it wouldn't stop at his name. They would aim at his reputation, his team, and even his mother if they had to. He called Maria Flores the next morning. "They're coming after you," she said, unsurprised after he relayed the call. "Beatrice doesn't lose quietly. She's going to weaponize your story and flip the narrative, make it seem like you're the aggressor." "Let her try," Nathan replied, but Maria was already thinking 5 steps ahead. "We need to show people who you are before she tells them who you're not." She got to work immediately. Within 72 hours, a new media campaign was launched. It featured no slogans or drama, only genuine stories. Warehouse employees recorded heartfelt testimonials. Investors spoke about Nathan's transparency during difficult financial quarters. Former interns posted videos about how he had mentored them without any need for cameras or social media hashtags. However, the most powerful video came from Elena Vance, who was seated in her small living room. She looked directly at the camera and said, "I didn't raise my son to be a businessman. I raised him to be a man. A man who understands that you must stand tall, especially when standing means losing something." Her statement landed like a thunderclap. Cable news channels couldn't ignore it, and the supportive hashtags began trending all over again. Suddenly, the Sterling Corporation's strategy of subtle discrediting and veiled accusations started to look exactly like what it was: bitterness. Still, they didn't give up. A week later, the Sterling Group released documents suggesting that Nathan had violated early partnership clauses during a 2021 deal with Apex Freight Solutions. The implication was that he had a history of abruptly cutting business ties. But the CEO of Apex, Simon Reyes, went on the record that same day stating, "Nathan Vance left our deal because he refused to approve wage cuts for our drivers. I wish I had done the same." The attempt backfired spectacularly. The narrative was slipping further from the Sterling family's grasp, and every move they made to regain control only magnified the original wound, one for which they still refused to acknowledge or apologize. Inside the Sterling family home, Beatrice was beginning to feel the walls close in. Contracts were evaporating, and invitations to exclusive events had disappeared. A prominent museum board rescinded her honorary seat. But Beatrice did not blame herself, not even for a moment. "It's a fad," she snapped at Harrison over breakfast. "This social media outrage, it will fade." Harrison wasn't so sure anymore. "It's not fading, Mother, it's building. And it's all because you never once said you were wrong." She sipped her coffee as if the conversation bored her. "And I won't," she stated. He stood then. "The family business doesn't need you anymore." She didn't respond, but for the first time, her hands trembled just slightly. But while the Sterlings were losing ground, Nathan was about to face a moment of truth that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with legacy. Nathan stood in his mother's backyard in Durham, watching her clip basil from the small planter box they had built together 3 seasons ago. The sun was low in the sky, casting a soft orange glow on the grass. Elena wore one of her older church dresses, faded at the seams but still perfectly pressed. She didn't say much, just moved slowly and methodically, as if the weight of the past few weeks hadn't affected her at all. But Nathan knew better. "Mom," he said, not looking directly at her, "are you all right with all this attention?" She didn't look up from her task. "The attention doesn't bother me, but I know what comes with it." "What do you mean?" Elena snipped another leaf, placing it gently into the bowl resting on her hip. "They don't like it when people like us walk out of their rooms with our heads held high. It makes them feel small, so they in turn try to make you feel smaller." He sat down on the porch steps. "They're still trying, still spinning this like I blew up the deal over nothing." She finally looked at him. "You know it wasn't about nothing," she said, "and anyone who claims it doesn't understand the value of respect." He nodded, remaining silent for a moment. "Leo is still upset," he admitted. "He feels like I took something away from our family." Elena walked over, carefully lowering herself onto the porch steps beside him. Darling, every family has to face its own storms. But if you break in the middle of one, what kind of legacy do you pass down to the ones who come after you? I just wanted to protect you, he said, his voice softening. And you did, she replied. But this was never just about me. It was about what you now represent. Don't you dare run from that. Nathan sat with her words, letting them sink in. Later that night, back at his apartment in Raleigh, he watched a news program replay the footage from his press conference. He disliked hearing himself on camera. His speech sounded too polished, too deliberate, not like the way he grew up speaking. But now, the world was listening to his every word, as if it were a declaration of policy. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Simon Reyes, the CEO of Apex. A Washington committee wants to speak with you. They're putting together a panel on ethical business practices, and they want you to lead it. Nathan stared at the screen. He never asked for any of this. He just wanted to build something that would last, something honest. But his story was morphing into something larger and louder than he'd ever intended. And with that transformation came a kind of pressure he had not anticipated. The next morning, he met with Maria and David again. This time, the energy in the room had changed completely. There were no raised voices, just tired eyes and long, relieved exhales. David spoke first. We've stabilized. That's the good news. Maria followed up. And all this publicity is actually helping us now, not hurting. 3 mid-sized logistics firms want to partner with us. Quietly, for now, but still. Because we stood for something, Nathan said. Because you stood for something, Maria corrected him gently. He paused. And now they want me to speak for it. Lead panels, sit on committees, be the face of some new ethical business movement. Maybe that's what comes next, David suggested. You've already built the business. Now you build the voice. But Nathan looked uncertain. He had never wanted to be a symbol. Symbols are heavy. People either worship them or tear them down, and neither of those options felt like a life he wanted. But he also knew that silence carried its own price. He picked up a dry erase marker and began sketching on the large whiteboard on the wall. Numbers, timelines, and expansion plans. It was nothing flashy, just the fundamental next phase of growth for their company. Let's scale without them, he said, with renewed focus. Let's prove we never needed that deal in the first place. Maria smiled. Now that's the Nathan I remember. David chuckled. Took you long enough to show back up, but Nathan wasn't finished. He pointed at her calendar on the wall, and next week, I want to hold an event right here. Not a press conference, a real event. For our warehouse crew, our interns, our junior staff, with food and music, to remind everyone who we truly are. Like a community day, Maria asked. No, he replied. Like a family reunion. The kind where everyone gets a plate, no matter where they came from. But before he could begin to organize that celebration, a final letter would arrive, one that had nothing to do with the Sterlings, yet would shake him just as deeply. The envelope was thin and off-white, with no return address, just Nathan's name typed cleanly across the center. It had arrived through the regular mail, mixed in with a stack of invoices and vendor proposals. He didn't notice it at first, and didn't even open it until hours later, when the office had cleared out, and the only sound was the low hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum somewhere down the hall. The letter inside was pennied in a neat, careful cursive, with every loop and curve formed as if the writer had practiced before putting the ink to paper. Mr. Vance, it began, you do not know me, but I know who you are. My father was the groundskeeper at Sterling Ridge from 1988 until he passed away in 2012. He raised me and my 3 sisters on the wages from that job. He woke up before the sun rose, never once complained, and taught us to hold on to our pride, even when we were treated as if we were invisible. I saw your story on the news, and I cried. Not because I was surprised by what happened to your mother, because I certainly was not, but because for the first time someone said no and truly meant it. You reminded me of my father. He never had the platform that you do, but he had your same spine. I just wanted you to know that not everyone forgets where they came from or what they stand up for. With deep respect, Sarah Bennett. Nathan read the letter twice before folding it slowly and placing it on his desk. That name, Sarah Bennett, stirred a vague sense of familiarity, but when he dug through his inbox and online networks, he found nothing. Later that night, he told his mother about it over dinner. She said her father was the groundskeeper he mentioned, pushing some food around on his plate. She said I reminded her of him. Elena looked thoughtful for a moment. It's funny how the truth reaches you, isn't it? It doesn't matter the route. It always finds you. Nathan nodded but didn't speak. He didn't need to. The letter had settled in his chest, not with the weight of regret, but with the gravity of profound meaning. He carried so much responsibility now, and it felt good to know his choice had resonated with someone who had lived in the shadow of that same estate for decades. The next day, he asked Maria to find Sarah. Quietly, she made some calls. A couple of days later, she had an update, found her. She's a fifth-grade teacher in Richmond, stays off social media, lives in a small apartment with a rescue dog. She said she never expected you to write back. I want to visit her, Nathan said. Should I call ahead? No, he decided. I'll just knock. 2 days later, he was standing on a small stoop in Richmond, holding a paper bag from a local bakery and feeling something he rarely ever felt anymore. Nervous. Sarah Bennett opened the door after the second knock. She looked to be in her late 40s with a brown ponytail and was wearing jeans and a school district sweatshirt. When she saw who it was, she froze. I'm Nathan, he said, holding up the bag. And this is banana bread. I figured you might be tired of everyone only wanting something from you. Sarah blinked, then let out a soft, breathy laugh. You'd better come in before my dog tries to adopt you. The inside of the apartment was warm and lived in. A framed photograph of an older man in work boots sat on the mantelpiece. Nathan walked over and looked at it closely. Your father, she nodded. He took care of that estate like it was his own. I know the type, he said with a small smile. Sarah offered him tea, and they sat and talked. She told him stories about her father, how he had stubbornly refused to call the Sterling sir and ma'am, how he saved every single paycheck, and how he taught her to read using the contracts and invoices he brought home from work. He would have liked you, she said finally, not because you became successful, but because you understood when it was time to walk away. They spoke for nearly 3 hours, with nothing recorded and no hashtags, just two people connecting over a shared history that neither of them had asked for, but that both had carried in their bones. When Nathan left, she handed him a copy of an old photograph, showing her dad standing proudly under a tall oak tree with a rake in his hand and a quiet dignity in his eyes. For when the world gets loud again, she said. He thanked her, carefully tucking the photo into his jacket pocket before walking back to his car. Because sometimes, the most powerful reminders don't come from news headlines. They come from handwritten words and old oak trees, and Nathan was about to face one final moment that would test whether everything he had stood for could hold up under the weight of a personal crisis. It started with our voicemail from a nurse. It was just a gentle request for him to call back, with an assurance that it wasn't urgent. His mother, Elena, had fainted briefly while at her weekly church group meeting. They had brought her to City General Hospital in Durham, just to be safe. Nathan didn't hesitate. He left a meeting mid-sentence, grabbed his car keys, and drove with his jaw locked tight. When he arrived, Elena was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking mildly annoyed by the situation and sipping a ginger ale as if she had more important places to be. I told them I just stood up too fast, she said as he entered the room. There was no need for all this fuss, but Nathan could see the exhaustion in her eyes and the way her hand trembled slightly as she set the cup down. He sat beside her on the bed, holding her wrist gently in his hand. What did the doctor say? He asked. That I need to slow down, take my iron supplements, and eat more leafy greens, she replied. The same things I'm always telling you. He managed a small smile at that, but it didn't untie the knot in his chest. A few minutes later, Dr. Emily Chen entered the room, a young, sharp, and direct physician with a kind face. She glanced at Elena before speaking softly to Nathan. Your mother's vitals have stabilized, but we'd like to run one more test, just to be thorough. Her blood pressure is fluctuating a bit more than we'd like. She hasn't had a complete cardiac workup in some time. Elena waved it off. I feel perfectly fine. Nathan nodded to the doctor. Run the test. Over the next 2 days, the results came in. There was nothing dire, no ticking time bomb, but there were small flags, a minor valve issue, a slight arrhythmia, and an iron deficiency. Nothing immediately critical, but also nothing that could be ignored. The message was unmistakable. Life doesn't wait for anyone. That night, as they sat together in her hospital room watching reruns of The Jeffersons, Elena spoke without looking away from the television screen. You've done good, baby, he chuckled. Did you just call me baby in front of the nurse? I brought you into this world, she retorted. I get to call you baby whenever I please. He smiled at her response, but didn't truly laugh. I'm not done yet, Mom. I know, she said, but don't wait too long to actually live. That statement landed differently. He looked at her then, really looked, at the deep lines carved into her face by years of time and sacrifice, at the woman who had never asked for a spotlight but had somehow become the heart of a national story. I've been thinking, he said, about what you told me about legacy and not passing down silence. She turned her head to face him. I want to start something, he continued. A foundation for the workers, the drivers, the warehouse crews and their families. Real tangible support, health screenings, child care assistance, tuition stipends, not just write-ups and workshops, but real action. A proud smile slowly formed on Elena's face. Now that sounds like you. I want to name it after you, he added. Her eyes welled up with tears, even as she tried to hide it with a cough. You don't need to do that. Yes, I do, Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. Because you built me. A few weeks later, the Elena Vance initiative was announced. It was not a flashy launch with a red carpet or a press tour, but simply a website, an introductory video, and initial partnerships with 3 non-profit organizations. It caught fire almost immediately. Local news outlets picked up the story, followed by national ones, and in a matter of weeks, the public conversation shifted once again, from one of confrontation to one of construction, from calling out broken systems to building better ones. At the first Community Day event hosted by the initiative, Nathan stood at a long folding table under a large white tent. Food trucks lined the parking lot, children ran between face painters and book drives, and employees who had once feared for their jobs now stood with their families, eating barbecue and talking about the future. He took the microphone for just a moment. I turned down $750 million, he said. People told me I was crazy, but this, right here, this is worth more than any check. The crowd applauded, not with a thunderous roar, but with a warm and genuine appreciation. Later that evening, as the sun set and the lot slowly began to empty, Nathan looked up at the sky and thought of Sarah Bennett's father, of his cousin Leo, of the Sterling boardroom, and of the look on his mother's face when he walked her out of that country club. Everything that had followed that initial storm had led him to this place, but just as he was starting to feel a sense of peace, one final message would arrive, not in ink or headlines, but from a voice he had not heard in decades, a voice tied to a part of his past he believed he had already buried. It came through as a voicemail. There was no warning, just a blinking notification on Nathan's phone after a full day of meetings. He tapped the icon absent-mindedly as he walked through the front door of his apartment, expecting a reminder from David or a vendor follow-up, but the second he heard the voice, he froze. Nathan, it's Robert. A pause. Yeah. I wasn't sure you'd still have this number, but I heard about what you did with that deal for your mother, and I just had to reach out. Robert, his father's brother, the uncle who hadn't called in over 22 years, the one who had vanished the night they lowered his father into the ground with no goodbye and no explanation. I saw you on the news. Your mama raised you right. No surprise there. I'm proud of you and I'm sorry for a lot. If you ever want to talk, this is my number now. The message ended. Nathan stood motionless, keys still in his hand, staring at the dark screen. His mind swirled. He hadn't thought about Robert in years. When his father died of a heart attack at 51, it was Robert who stood beside him at the casket and promised, I've got you. Then there was nothing. Nathan remembered waking up on his 14th birthday, desperately hoping for a card or a call that never came. He poured a glass of water and sat at his kitchen counter, listening to the message again. The voice was older, slower, but it was unmistakably him. He couldn't sleep that night as memories flooded back. His dad fixing the water heater on a cold morning, his hands covered in grease. Robert bringing over barbecued ribs wrapped in foil every 4th of July. And then the silence, as if a door had been slammed shut and he was left on the wrong side. In the morning, Elena called. "I heard from Robert," she said, skipping any small talk. "He called you too, left a message yesterday, same as he did with me, I imagine." "I don't know what he wants." Nathan's voice was tight. "Maybe nothing," she said gently. "Maybe he's just trying to find some peace while he still has time." "I'm not sure I need peace with him," he retorted. She was quiet for a moment. "Baby, sometimes that peace isn't for them, it's for you." That line stuck with him. Later that day, he replayed the voicemail one more time, and this time, he didn't feel the sharp sting of anger. He just felt tired, as if a part of him had been holding up a heavy weight for far too long. He waited until evening, then picked up his phone and called the number back. It rang 3 times before a voice answered. "Nathan?" it asked, cautious but hopeful. "Yeah, it's me." A long pause, then a small sad laugh from the other end. "You sound just like your father." "I get that a lot." Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Robert sighed. "I'm not calling to try and explain away the silence. I was a coward. After your dad passed, I couldn't look at anything that reminded me of him. And you were a mirror." Nathan said nothing. "I left because it was easier than staying and failing you," Robert continued. "I didn't need you to succeed, Robert," Nathan said quietly. "I just needed you to stay." His uncle's voice cracked. I know I let you down." They spoke for 20 more minutes, not about business or betrayal, but about old fishing trips, Nathan's high school football games, and how Robert had been following his career from the sidelines, quietly and from a distance. When they hung up, Nathan didn't feel perfect closure, but he felt lighter. Later that week, he mentioned the call during a team retreat. "Forgiveness isn't approval," he told his staff. "It's just refusing to let bitterness take up all the space inside you." People nodded, some smiled, and a few understood on a level deeper than they showed. As Nathan was leaving the venue that evening, a young intern caught up to him. "Mr. Vance," she said, a little breathless, "I just wanted to thank you. My dad always told me that no one in business really sticks to their morals, that it always just comes down to the money. You proved him wrong." He smiled. "No, my mother did." And as he walked to his car, head held high and his heart clear, Nathan finally understood. Legacy isn't what you leave behind for people. It's what you live through and what you refuse to let die in silence.